back in the sewing room today. I'll be making this lattice square quilt block, and I think it's a really cool block. It has the illusion of looking like it's made of 4 half-square triangles with squares in the center. And when I measure it out today, it'll measure at 12.5 inches square, and then it'll finish in a quilt project at 12 inches square. So let's go to the design wall, take a close look at it, and I'll show you how to make it. The block consists of 4 quadrants sewn together, and each quadrant is composed of a center square, a square on each side, 2 half-square triangles, and 2 rectangles. You'll need to cut 4 2.5-inch squares for your centers, and from both of your colors, you'll cut 4 each, 4 3-inch squares, 4 2.5-inch squares, and then 4 2.5 by 4.5-inch rectangles. First, I'll make the 8 half-square triangle patches using the 3-inch squares, 1 from each of my colors, and it'll finish. Here's one that I've completed. It'll finish at 2.5 inches square. And I've shown my favorite technique for making these half-square triangles, but I'll show it again on this video. So what you'll do is on the back of your lighter color fabric, draw a diagonal line from one corner to the other. And I like to use a fine point pen . Now place the 3-inch squares right sides together. And what I'll do is take it over to the machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam on each side of my drawn line. Each of these units will create 2 half-square triangles. So with my 4 pairs, I'll create my 8 half-square triangles that I need for the block. I have my 1/4 inch presser foot. I have my leader fabric. Here's my first patch. And I don't pin them, but you most certainly can. And again, 1/4 inch seam on each side. And I'll feed my next one right in. And I'll snip these apart. Put my leader fabric back in. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. And snip apart. Now I'll simply cut along my drawn line. And you can see that now you have 2 half-square triangles. 1 and 2. And to press, I'll be pressing toward my darker fabric, so I'll have that on top. And I just like to set the seam. Open it up and just give it a little finger press and press. And I'll repeat that with the other patches off camera. Now each of these needs to be squared up to 2.5 inches. I'll use my favorite square up ruler from Quilt in a Day. There's lots of them on the market. Just pick out your favorite. And I'll line up this diagonal line with my diagonal seam. I have it lined up on my diagonal line, and you just want to make sure you have a little bit of fabric beyond the 2.5 inch mark on each of the 4 sides. And I'll begin by cutting off this side and the top right here. Now I'll flip it around and cut these two sides. Again, same thing, line up the diagonal line with my diagonal seam. This time, however, I want to match up here and here at exactly the 2.5 inch mark. And you want to make sure that this line is right exactly in your corner. Here it's a little off, so I'll just move it a teeny bit. And I'll cut here and here. And you have a perfectly square 2.5 inch half square triangle. I'll repeat that off camera with my other patches. I've placed my patches in the correct order, and you can see you're using 3 rows to create one patch, one quadrant. And if you get confused on the placement, just keep in mind that you just want a straight line of pink on one side, or whatever your color is, and then your other color, a straight line going in the opposite direction. Now I'll sew my 3 rows, right sides together. I want to sew right down here, so I will place my pin in the direction that I want to sew. That way I won't get confused. So that just alerts me that I want to start here or here and sew this direction. And then I'll do this one. Same thing. And this one. And I'll remove my pin. Now that those are sewn, I'll add on my other side to my center row. And I'll sew that off camera, and then I will press the seams. I have that final square sewn on my center. Now I like to finger press at this point to make sure my seam allowances are going in the opposite direction for joining these rows. So for my long rectangles, I like to go in this direction, in the direction of my rectangle. So I just give it a little finger press, and then I want to make sure this one's going in the opposite direction. So if you can see what I mean, when I join them, one will be going here, and the other will be going in this direction. And I'll do that here. Finger press, and then just make sure this one is going with my rectangle on top that way. And off camera, I will take them to the pressing area and give them a press. Now join the 3 rows together. It's simply right sides together, and I want to pin in the direction I'll be sewing. And then I'll need to carefully match up this seam right here. I think right now I'll just use a pin, and I'll put it on just on the other side of that seam. I'll remove my pin, and I will carefully match up at the beginning. And I really like to use my stiletto just to kind of check the back, make sure my seam isn't flipped in the wrong direction. And remove my pin. And then make sure I'm still lined up. I'll check my seam, make sure it matched up and it looks great. And then off camera, I will add my 3rd row. I'll do the same thing, right sides together. I'll match up this seam, pin, and then a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along here. I have my 3rd row sewn on. Just give it a little press. And there's 1 quadrant complete. I'll complete the other 3 quadrants off camera and then show you how to join them together. Now that I have these 4 sections all sewn together, off camera I went ahead and pressed them. And what I did is I pressed these 2 seam allowances going in one direction, and then these 2 going in the opposite direction. So they'll be nice and easy to join. And here I'll have to match up this seam and this seam. And then this one. And then I just make sure the ends meet up and they look good. And I'll repeat that on this one. I'll take it to the machine, both of them, and I will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance here and here. I'll check my seams, make sure they matched up. They look pretty good, so I will sew the other 2 off camera and meet you at the pressing area. And I will set my seam, and I'll press, again, the seams going in opposite directions so they will nestle together nicely. One. And I'll turn this one around. And the final seam right down here, there's just 1 seam to match up, and right in the very center. So I'll pin that. Then I'll take it to the machine, a 1/4 inch seam allowance all along here. And I will set my seam. And finger press and press. And the final measure, 12.5 inches square. There you have it, the lattice square quilt block. And normally when I make this block, I'll make all 4 quadrants at the same time, and it goes fairly quickly. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.